Rape and murder together become a very terrible crime that not everyone has the strength to do. This is the story of the life of a psychopath and serial killer named Jeffrey Dahmer. And my request to you, dear viewers, is that if you are in a weak mood, leave this page because I have terrible and unfortunate events to tell. Be with me with the biography of a serial killer. Jeffrey Dahmer, a convicted serial killer and sex offender, murdered 17 men between 1978 and 1991. He was killed in prison by one of his fellow prisoners in 1994. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer who killed 17 men between 1978 and 1991. For more than 13 years, Dahmer sought out men, mostly African Americans, in gay bars, shopping malls and bus stops and lured them home. He promised them money or sex, and gave them alcohol along with drugs before strangling them. Then, before decomposing and disposing of the corpses, he had sex with the corpses and often kept their skulls or genitals as souvenirs. He often photographed his victims in various stages of the murder process, so he could remember each action afterward and relive the experience. Dahmer was arrested in 1991 and sentenced to 16 years in prison. He was killed in 1994 by fellow prisoner Christopher Scarver. Childhood and family. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on May 21, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He was described as an energetic and happy child until the age of 4, when surgery to repair a double hernia seemed to change the boy. Significantly resigned, he became increasingly withdrawn after the birth of his younger brother and frequent family moves. In his early teens, he was dysfunctional, tense, and mostly friendless. Jeffrey Dahmer claims that his compulsion to necrophilia and murder began around the age of 14. But it appears that the breakdown of his parents' marriage and their acrimonious divorce a few years later may have turned these thoughts into action. At the time of his first murder, Dahmer's alcohol consumption was out of control. He dropped out of Ohio State University after a quarter of a semester, and his recently married father insisted he join the army. Dahmer enlisted in late December 1978 and was sent to Germany shortly thereafter. His drinking problem continued, and in early 1981, the army discharged him. Although German authorities later investigated a possible connection between Dahmer and the murders that occurred at the time, he is not believed to have had any other victims while serving in the armed forces. After his discharge, Dahmer returned to Ohio. An arrest later that year for disorderly conduct led his father to send him to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. But his alcohol problem continued and he was arrested for disorderly conduct the following summer. She was arrested again in 1986 when 2 boys accused her of masturbating in front of them. He received a 1-year suspended sentence. Victims. Dahmer killed 17 men between 1978 and 1991. He was careful to choose victims on the fringes of society, who were often criminals and strays, making their disappearance less noticeable and reducing the likelihood of his arrest. He lured them to his house with promises of money or sex, and then strangled them. He had sex with their bodies and kept the body parts and photos as souvenirs. The first 4 victims. Dahmer's first murder occurred right after graduating high school in June 1978, when he picked up a horseman named Stephen Hicks and drove him home to his parents' house. Jeffrey Dahmer tried to get the young man drunk. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer killed him by hitting him in the head and strangling him with a barbell. Dahmer dismembered the body of his first victim, placed the body parts in plastic bags and buried them behind his parents' house. He later removed the remains from the grave, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them in a forested ravine. It was in September 1987 that Dahmer took his second victim, Stephen Twomey. They enter a hotel room and drink, and Dahmer eventually wakes up to find Twomey dead and with no memory of the previous night's activities. He bought a large suitcase to transport Twomey's body to his grandmother's basement, where he dismembered her body and masturbated before disposing of the remains. It was only after Dahmer killed 2 more victims at his grandmother's house that he grew tired of his grandson's late nights and drunkenness, although he had no knowledge of his other activities, and forced him out in 1988. Allegations of sexual assault. In September 1989, Dahmer had a very lucky escape. An encounter with a 13-year-old Laotian boy led to charges of sexual abuse and second-degree rape against Dahmer. He admitted his guilt by claiming that the boy looked much older. While awaiting sentencing in his rape case, Dahmer once again put his grandmother's basement to gruesome use. In March 1989, he lured, drugged, strangled Anthony Sears, an aspiring model. Destroyed, photographed, cut into pieces and destroyed. At his trial for child molestation in May 1989, Dahmer was the epitome of misunderstanding. Arguing in his defense that he had seen the errors of his ways and that his arrest was a turning point in his life. His defense attorney argued that he needed treatment, not prison, and the judge agreed, imposing a 1-year sentence on day liberty, allowing Dahmer to work during the day and return to prison at night, for example, as well as 5 years of suspended imprisonment. Years later, Jeffrey Dahmer stated in an interview with CNN that he wrote a letter to the sentencing court and asked for psychological help before his son was released on parole. However, after serving only 10 months of his sentence, Dahmer was granted early release by the judge. He lived with his grandmother for a short time after his release, during which time he does not appear to have increased his body count, before returning to his apartment. The last 13 victims. Over the next 2 years, Dahmer's death toll accelerated, his total from 4 to 17. As he progressed, he developed rituals, experimented with chemical means of extermination, and often consumed the flesh of his victims. Dahmer also attempted crude lobotomies, drilling into victims' skulls while they were still alive and injecting them with muriatic acid. On May 27, 1991, Sandra Smith, Dahmer's neighbor, called the police and reported that a naked Asian boy was running down the street. When police arrived, the boy was incoherent, and they accepted the word Dahmer, a white man in a predominantly poor African American community, was the son of his 19-year-old lover. In fact, the boy was 14 years old, and Lee Dahmer's teenage brother had been molested 3 years earlier. The police brought Dahmer and the boy home. Obviously not wanting to get involved in the gay domestic mess, they only took a quick look around before leaving. When the police left the scene, Dahmer killed the boy and continued his routine. If they had done even a basic search, they would have found the body of Jeffrey Dahmer's 12th victim, Tony Hughes. The crime scene in the arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer, the refrigerator and the Polaroids. Dahmer's murder ended with his arrest on July 22, 1991. Body parts found in Dahmer's refrigerator and Polaroid photographs of his victims were inextricably linked to the infamous crime of his murder. 2 Milwaukee police officers directed Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old African-American man who was wandering the streets with handcuffs hanging from his wrists, to Dahmer. They decided to investigate the man's claims that he had been drugged and restrained by a strange person. They arrived at Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, where he calmly offered to take the keys to the bracelet. Edwards claimed that the knife Dahmer had threatened her with was in the bedroom. When the officer arrived to verify the story, he noticed Polaroid photos of dismembered bodies lying around. Jeffrey Dahmer was surrendered by officers. Subsequent searches revealed a head in the refrigerator, 3 more in the freezer, and a catalog of other horrors, including preserved skulls, jars containing genitalia, and an extensive gallery of gruesome Polaroid photographs of his victims. In 1996, after Dahmer's death, a group of Milwaukee businessmen raised more than $400,000 to buy items he used for his victims, including blades, saws, handcuffs and refrigerators to store body parts. They immediately destroyed them to try to distract the city from the horror of Dahmer's actions and the media circus surrounding his trial. Trial and imprisonment. Dahmer's trial began in January 1992. Given that the majority of Dahmer's victims were African American, there were significant racial tensions, so extreme security precautions were taken, including an 8-foot bulletproof glass barrier that separated him from the gallery. The presence of only one African American on the jury sparked further unrest, but it was ultimately contained and short-lived. Lionel Jeffrey Dahmer and his second wife were present during the trial. Dahmer initially pleaded not guilty to all charges despite confessing to the murder during police interrogations. He finally changed his plea to guilty due to insanity. His defense then provided gruesome details of his behavior, as proof that only a madman could commit such horrific acts. The jury chose to believe the prosecution's claim that Dahmer was fully aware of the evil of his actions and committed them anyway. On February 15, 1992, they returned after nearly 10 hours of deliberation to find him guilty, but sane, by all accounts. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive terms of imprisonment and the 16th sentence was issued in May. Dahmer is said to have adapted well to life in prison, although he was initially kept separate from the general public. He finally convinced the authorities to allow him to communicate more fully with the other prisoners. He found religion in the form of books and photographs sent to him by his father, and was allowed by the Reformed Mission of Columbia to be baptized by a local priest. Death. Jeffrey Dahmer was killed on November 28, 1994 by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver. Consistent with his inclusion on the regular work detail, Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted of working with two other killers, Scarver and Jesse Anderson. After they were left alone to complete their tasks, the guards returned to find that Scarver had brutally beaten both men from the prison weight room with a metal bar. Jeffrey Dahmer was pronounced dead about an hour later. Anderson died a few days later. In 2015, Scarver spoke to the New York Post about his reasons for killing Dahmer. Scarver claimed that he was disturbed not only by Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes, but also by Dahmer's habit of creating severed limbs from prison food to antagonize other inmates. After being taunted by Dahmer and Anderson as they went about their business, Scarver said he confronted Dahmer about his crimes before beating the two men. He also claimed that the prison guards allowed the murder to happen by leaving the murderer alone. Jeffrey Dahmer's house. In August 2012, nearly 2 decades after his death, it was reported that Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home in Bath, Ohio, where he committed his first murder in 1978 and buried his victims' remains, was on the market. Its owner, musician Chris Butler, said the property would make a great home, provided the buyer could get past the scare factor. In March 2016, Butler rented the house for $8,000 for the week of the Republican National Convention. As of July 2017, the home was no longer on the market, according to Zillow.com. Jeffrey Dahmer's movies and books. The Story of Jeffrey Dahmer, An American Nightmare, by Donald A. Davis. It was published in November 1991, just a few months after Dahmer's arrest. Jeffrey Dahmer's Shrine, by Brian Masters, published in 1993. Notable films about Dahmer's life and massacre include Jeffrey Dahmer, a 2002 biopic starring Jeremy Renner; The Jeffrey Dahmer Files, a 2012 documentary covering Dahmer's arrest in the summer of 1991. My Friend Dahmer, a 2017 film about Dahmer's alcoholic adolescence, based on the 2012 graphic novel of the same name by Derf Backderf. Frequently asked questions about Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer the killer. 1. Why is Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer's character discussed as a murderer? There have been various rumors and claims about Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer's connection to criminal offenses. These claims are usually based on images created by the media and unofficial news releases. 2. Is there any documented evidence for the murderous claims about Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer? So far, no definite and documented reasons have been provided for the murderous claims about Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Many of these claims go back to mistakes and misrepresentations by the media. 3. What are the effects of people being falsely portrayed as murderers? Depicting people as murderers without valid and documented reasons can have irreparable consequences for their lives. These effects can cause serious problems in people's personal and professional lives and may even cause serious damage to their reputation and credibility. 4. How much information and evidence is available to confirm or deny claims of murder? Based on the available information, there is no evidence or legal information available to confirm or deny the murder allegations against Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Also, these types of claims have not been officially confirmed or denied so far. Conclusion. In general, the murderous claims about Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer are mostly based on rumors and unofficial pictures, and so far no documentary evidence has been provided for these claims. The negative effects of these types of claims on people's lives and their reputations can be irreparable, so we always need to be careful about publishing and republishing news and rumors.